We're finally here. After making the dubious decision several months ago to cover and pair up every Fire Emblem Lord, plus some change, into a death battle styled matchup, we have gone through over 20 different characters across every era of the series. But at last, we've come to the end, into the era that first got into death battle proper, through Dimitri vs. Guts. The death battle episode that made me want to make this whole series in the first place, and which seems to have drawn a lot of you guys to the channel in the first place. So it is my pleasure to deliver the final matchups for every Fire Emblem Lord and Lord adjacent character as we go into the Switch era of Fire Emblem. Listen, I know, I hear you. I know what you want. I know that Byleth vs. Reen is a very well-liked matchup, and you can bet that I have no intention of covering it. Because frankly, I have one that I like much better. Byleth vs. Shulk from Xenoblade Chronicles. Ooh yeah! Got my Xenoblade fix for the day. Now, obvious spoilers for just about everything in Xenoblade Chronicles, so be warned. World-saving heroes that were at one point dead until made into the vessel of creator gods that are responsible for the worlds they live in. But said gods eventually were forced into a deep slumber due to a battle against a technologically advanced race and their bodies used by the people that would come later. The heroes who house the gods gain unique effects from this cohabitation, usually pertaining to manipulation of time in one way or another, such as Byleth stopping or rewinding time and Shulk being able to see and change the future. These powers are also tied to magical swords with potentially cataclysmic power that are said to be swords of the gods, but in reality are part of the gods themselves. While fighting against what they think is a morally black and white enemy, they begin to realize the shades of gray in the world they live in, embodied by a radical leader they come to blows with, who seeks to make a grave sacrifice for the greater good. Eventually, the godly power within them awakens, resulting in history-defining consequences, which are different for each character, based on the relationship they have with said inner god. For instance, Byleth's relationship with Sothis is, usually, very friendly, while Shulk and Zanza's is infinitely worse. And, depending on if Byleth takes the Crimson Flower route, both can fight alongside representatives of every walk of life to ensure a world for humanity itself, rather than a world for the gods. If any of you watch my countdown videos, which you should, I'm not asking, you'll know that me and Xenoblade are close. And this was one of the few matchups I knew I wanted to cover from the very beginning of this list. The other was Alir's matchup, but we'll get to that. Okay, better character first. Shulk. To start, Shulk in his younger days is a classic Xenoblade combo attacker that uses arts like Stream Edge and Air Slash to set up for break-topple combos, as well as directional abilities such as Backslash and Slit Edge, with the latter also being able to lower the target's physical defense. Shadow Eye decreases aggro directed at him and increases the damage of the next physical art, and he can use Light Heal to top off his HP in a pinch. He also has Battle Soul, which sacrifices HP in order to fill up his talent gauge, which in turn allows him to access his biggest set of abilities, Monado Arts. There are 8 Monado Arts, all of varying viability. Enchant is entirely useless, as Byleth is not mechanical in any way. Buster is also not as useful as normal due to the same reason, although it still outputs plenty of damage. Shield and Speed are best used to avoid attacks, especially when Shulk knows it's coming. Purge removes aura effects and seals said auras, though I'm not 100% sure how those would work against Byleth. Maybe they temporarily seal certain skills. Monado Armor reduces all damage of any kind directed at Shulk. Cyclone creates an AoE attack that can trigger topple on an opponent already suffering from break, and Eater disables a target's buffs and inflicts the bleed status. I'm unsure how to treat Shulk's future redeemed version in this whole thing. If you give him Ouroboros, you by nature have to remove his visions and vice versa, although some of his non-Ouroboros dependent arts from Future Redeemed could carry over, like Heavy Rush and... Oh, that's the only unique one. The full scale of what Shulk can do is a bit hard to determine, as to be expected with a JRPG protagonist that fights a supposed god in space and kills them. Depending on how you view the Monado, his overall power could be far above Byleth to an excessive degree. However, I personally have no reason to believe it's universal level or whatever, primarily because the main feat people use for that is killing Zanza, whenever they're clearly fighting him in a sort of pseudo-mind space. Moving on to Byleth, who I will refer to as female regardless of what Engage tries to tell me. Hopes advertised female Byleth, and I will continue to do so. To start, Byleth has way more diverse options compared to Shulk. Besides magic, classic multiple types of weapons, and aforementioned stopping and rewinding time, Byleth has some kind of weapon for almost any situation. Although most of her magical attacks are just different variations of your face explode, except for Nosferatu, which you probably know by now, heals her for damage dealt. Of her many sword options, she has the various famous swords like the Killing Edge, Levin Sword, and so on, along with things like the Sublime Creator Sword, which is an empowered version of the Sword of the Creator, which could supposedly destroy mountains. Her skills are just as varied, with things like Healing Focus allowing her to actively regenerate, various sword skills to deal with monsters, flying enemies, or other things that won't be relevant in a death battle, and a combat art unique to the Sword of the Creator and the Sublime Creator Sword. Naturally, thanks to 3 hopes, Byleth has an awakening gauge, which is constantly being filled through the skill Saint's power. And there's Goddess's Vessel, which reduces the chance for knockback when the gauge is 50% full or higher. Now, here comes the biggest question. How would their timey-wimey powers work against each other? Well, for Byleth's rewind powers, Shulk would have the obvious advantage. He'd use a vision to undermine one of Byleth's strategies, and Byleth would rewind time to correct it, only for Shulk to do it again. Shulk might be confused at first, but he'd still get the jump on that ability, especially since it's canonically limited in its use. For Byleth's time stop, showed off in 3 hopes, that'd be a bit harder for Shulk to counter. He may see an unknown attack cause him damage and move to protect himself, but speed means little when he's being stopped dead in his tracks. That said, depending on your interpretation of Monado Purge and Eater, these abilities could serve as a counterbalance to Byleth's time stopping too, although that's purely speculative. I'm not terribly concerned about who'd win this death battle, although if I had to place my bets, I'm going with Shulk. Other than her time powers, Byleth doesn't have much that Shulk hasn't dealt with before, or that the Monado can't counter. Add to it that Shulk has been shown to be able to damage actual gods with either a replicated or even his own Monado, and the Sword of the Creator could theoretically be broken, something we have no reason to believe Byleth could do to any version of the Monado except for maybe a replicated one. At best, Byleth's capable of taking on Rhea, meanwhile at his best, Shulk is taking on hits from Zanza. Yes, I did say that it was happening in a mindscape, and I don't think Zanza was hitting Shulk with the power of the creation of a universe, but it's still important to note. Besides that, neither did either of those things alone, obviously, but when you put it like that, you start to realize that these two, while still likely being similar on most levels, don't compare when it really counts. And again, that's me downplaying Shulk's power. Perhaps you weren't expecting it, but Shez is getting talked about too. After all my references to Fire Emblem Warriors, did you honestly think I wouldn't bring up the best Avatar character since Robin? Not a chance. Besides that, it gives me the chance to give a character I like that Death Battle grievously mishandled another matchup that I feel is far better than the one he got. Shez vs. Asta from Black Clover. Orphans with mysterious origins and even more mysterious powers that grow up in a world where the nobility look down upon others for not possessing a certain inherited magical trait. Rising up through hard work and a special power of their own, which comes with a brain gremlin, and has some dark connection to their mothers, they and a few friends make a name for themselves in a world that would otherwise have forgotten them entirely. They have a powerful rivalry with a largely emotionless person that has also gained a special power. However, while the rivalry starts purely antagonistic for Shez, they both become rivalries based on respect. The special power they hold allows them to transform into a different form, which they use to overcome the very group of people that they likely gained this power from. With the aforementioned Brain Gremlin as their partners, who are temporarily enemies, they fight alongside their teams to defeat powerful foes that are likely well beyond their normal capabilities, but can be defeated through working together. Not only does this give Asta another chance to shine, and I mean really shine, Shez serves as an actual thematic opposite to him. Asta was already covered okay-ish on Death Battle proper, but let's cover the broad strokes for consistency's sake. If you don't already know, Asta's primary power is his anti-magic that he channels through his swords. His Demon Slayer sword negates and deflects magic, the Demon Dweller sword absorbs and stores magic for later use, Demon Destroyer negates magical effects, and the Demon Slasher sword does pretty much the same thing as the Demon Slayer, but now it can fire projectiles of anti-magic. As a somewhat defensive measure, Asta can sense ki as he was taught to by Yami. In Black Clover, ki sensing is essentially picking up on the cues that a person's body emits by existing. If you breathe, you put off ki, even if only slightly. And with that, Asta can track you. Want to teleport? It can be tricky, but he'll at least know where you are as soon as you pop back into space nearby, which would be rough for Shez. Naturally, all these powers stem from Libe. the demon that houses itself in the 5-leaf clover that is attached to Asta. With their powers combined, Asta and Libe can enter into a special form where anti-magic coats Asta's body. His anti-magic is naturally drawn towards strong magic, meaning that it can react without Asta needing to consciously make an action, although he does grow able to more actively command this power. While his powers are generally rather basic, in practice, Asta has used them to remarkable effect, particularly when he's paired with those that complement his fighting style. Asta is very much a brute force-centered fighter, but he's no meathead. He's an instinctual fighter that plans in the moment to react accordingly to whatever his opponent throws at him, and I will never forgive Death Battle for misrepresenting him. I'm calm. I am calm. Let's move on to Shez. Shez's greatest asset is his ability to control a battlefield. Shadow Flash is an ability he can use frequently that lets him effectively teleport, and he has a sword that he can recreate in his hand no matter how many times it breaks. Or, he just throws at his enemies. Furthermore, he has the power of Epimenides and his dark magic that fuels his awakened form. He can learn some healing magic as well as dark magic like Dark Spikes or Mire, and he has access to many swords found in 3 Hopes, which we covered with Byleth, as well as skills like Miracle or Backbone, the latter of which reduces the chance of being knocked back by attacks. When possessed by Epimenides/Arval, which can happen, he's shown to be able to teleport himself and others over longer distances and can cast the forbidden spell of Zaharos, although it requires a sacrifice seemingly of another Agarthan, so that's less likely to be usable in a fight. Still, Arval can be aware of things Shez isn't, can be conscious while Shez isn't, and overall can act as a special navigator of sorts when Shez is in the middle of a battle, offering either advice or warning based on what they perceive. The character dynamic for this fight would probably be pretty wholesome and could even start as a friendly sparring match to show off their strength, with the two of them even bonding over their very emotionless rivals and how fun it is to fight someone who is as clearly into it as they are. And while I'd love to back Shez, I do think that Asta would overwhelm him. Most of Shez's best abilities are magic-based, at least as far as we know, and Asta could counter that as he usually does. There's plenty of stuff of Agarthan origin that's actually just technology portrayed as magic. We've not been shown that to be the case when it comes to Shez, and I doubt that it would be the case. As I mentioned before, while Shez's Shadow Flash and teleportation could certainly disorient Asta at first, it wouldn't take long for Asta's ki sensing to start countering that as well. The one advantage that Shez has is the sheer variety of his skills and weapons, most of which Asta's anti-magic would likely have no effect on. Another sort of advantage could be Shez's ability to frequently go into an awakened state over and over, as well as Arval/Epimenides' ability to possess Shez even if Shez is out cold. But Asta's been shown to explicitly be able to undo possession, and that same sword might even be able to work on Shez's awakened form. At the very least, both characters would get to have a truly memorable fight that would be worthy of both of them. Dimitri versus... no one. Look, I tried, I really did, but besides Dimitri already having an episode, it's against the one character that is probably his best matchup. Look, just check out the Death Battle episode if you somehow haven't, and we'll move on to characters that haven't gotten the spotlight yet. Edelgard. Besides being controversial, she's also becoming more and more talked about when it comes to Death Battle matchups, particularly because of Dimitri's episode. And who do most people pair her up against? Griffith, naturally, the nemesis of Guts, who fought Dimitri, so wouldn't it be cool if the nemeses of both fought each other? No, it wouldn't. Ignoring that besides very superficial similarities, Edelgard and Griffith don't really have any thematic reasons to be pitted against each other. Edelgard as a character would not be able to bounce off of Griffith in any meaningful way, and that'd just be a disservice to her. But do you want to know a character she can bounce off of? Edelgard versus Anders from Dragon Age. Revolutionaries that grew up as a part of an oppressive system that either uplifted or subjugated a subset of people based on an inherited trait that cannot be controlled, crests and magic. Said system is supported or at least condoned by a religious organization headed by a chief priestess who becomes the target of scorn for both the revolutionary and their movement. While alongside remarkable heroes that have the power to effect great change, they work in the background to see their grand vision realized, culminating in a massive betrayal of questionable morality when they wage war against aforementioned religious organizations, which soon envelops the entire continent. They underwent a transformation of some kind earlier in their life that resulted in them gaining unique powers that both help and haunt them as they do battle with the military arms of the church in their worlds. Ultimately, they go through their plans whether you help them or not. as all you can choose to do is support them or kill them as traitors. Remarkably, this is a matchup I have not seen anywhere, which, as I just proved, is surprising since they have a lot in common. Anders is a mage from the world of Dragon Age, and as such can call on the powers of the Fade, a transient dream realm in which the sleeping mind and the spirits exist alongside each other. He draws upon mana for these powers, which is a naturally regenerating energy, but if he needs a boost, he can always down a lyrium potion. Anders is a spirit healer by trade, a mage who draws on the benevolent spirits of the Fade to heal or empower himself and his allies. However, like any mage, he can learn all sorts of spells, from the elemental spells to the creation spells or the entropy spells, and so on, especially from Dragon Age Awakening, in which he first appears. Healing, glyphs, area covering elemental spells, debuffs, buffs, all that fun stuff. He can also have a wide range of specializations in Awakening, although they seemingly aren't present by Dragon Age 2. Speaking of, in Dragon Age 2, Anders has his own unique class based on his fusion with a Spirit of Justice, that has been warped into a Spirit of Vengeance by Anders' own anger. Channeling this power either into the healing state of Panacea or the aggressive state of Vengeance lets him focus entirely on those states. However, both have their drawbacks. In his Panacea state, he can heal but can't attack except with basic staff attacks or magic bolts. And with his Vengeance state, while his attacks and spells are boosted considerably, he's unable to heal himself and is more susceptible to damage. Although in his Vengeance state, he can cast spells 90% faster. Anders' armor is a robe called Renegade's Coat, and when fully upgraded grants defenses against magical damage, increases attack and armor, and has more capabilities for enhancements via runes. He also has various accessories that boost mana regeneration or his general magic stat. Way back when we covered Alistair, I covered the general variety of items and weapons that Dragon Age characters have access to, all with bonuses that stack over time. I won't be getting too deep into those with Anders because, okay, let's be honest, Anders probably isn't winning this. Anders at his best is blowing up churches, and that's with tons of prep time. Meanwhile, Edelgard is fighting demigods figuratively and literally with Dimitri and Byleth on equal footing. Her ability to effortlessly wield her signature weapon Eimer is more than enough testament to her natural power. Bearing both the Crest of Saros and the Crest of Flames, which increase the might of her attacks and heal for 30% of damage dealt respectively, it is through these crests that she wields Eimer, which is specifically designed by Agarthans for her. And by channeling fire through her weapons, she can devastate a battlefield. Should the need arise, she can also turn to magic such as Nosferatu, Luna, or even Hades, the most powerful dark magic spell. Just like so many others, she also has a wide range of skills that can be learned, like Healing Focus, Axe Fair, and the super essential Armored Effect Null, which completely removes her greatest weakness as an armored unit: magic. And of course, we can't forget Hegemon Edelgard. A monstrous transformation she can take on, whether through preparation for better results or just in the moment. Edelgard becomes an enormous husk monster that can use the power of her crests themselves to attack rapidly and from far away. The Hegemon is able to tear down city walls and send armies fleeing alone. It's only through the might of the entire kingdom army that she's able to be taken down in the Azure Moon route. Naturally, she wouldn't turn into this thing on a whim, and it's possible she couldn't even, if she wanted to, as the mechanics of it are pretty vague, if I'm being honest, and we shouldn't be too hasty to give her something that she may or may not have. These two have perhaps one of my favorite possible fight dynamics, as they're both visionaries that want to see a better world. However, in many ways, their beliefs contrast. Edelgard would prefer a world where the innately magical crests didn't exist, which would contrast with Anders' own belief that the inheritance of magic makes a person truly special and shouldn't be subjugated but celebrated. Their differences in opinion, combined with their stubborn natures and a touch of Vengeance's interference, could lead to the death battle. During it, they battle for their ideals, with every attack between them furthering their understanding. But as Anders is pushed to the brink, he relies too much on Vengeance's power and the spirit takes control, releasing an onslaught of magic that Edelgard struggles to keep up with. However, in recognizing Anders' willingness to discard his own humanity for his dreams, Edelgard grows to respect her opponent. Whether Edelgard decides to become Hegemon Edelgard in response or to defeat him while retaining her humanity symbolically would be up to a person's interpretation of how they'd interact. If Anders was truly able to push Edelgard to the limit of using that power, then it would be seen as Edelgard seeing the lengths Anders will go to and realizing that there can be no half measures, becoming the monster she must be for her new world. Should Edelgard refuse, she can put Anders out of his misery with respect and dignity, letting both him and Justice be at peace, knowing that someone with a similar enough dream will continue on. However you choose to play it, this has the potential to hold as much of an impact as Dimitri and Guts' ending, with maybe even more emotional weight. Claude was disappointing to find a matchup for. Nowhere I searched could I find a matchup that truly felt natural for Claude, so I'll go with the best I've got. I'm sorry. Claude versus Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon. Yes, this is the best I could find. Young men who are the sons of their people's leaders who grow up as outcasts and eventually use their smarts to lead their people, while riding flying reptiles and changing the way their cultures operated for the better. So, I think it's fair to say Claude wins? Full stop, no analysis needed. Claude channels wind, can attack from insane distances, and possesses a bow made from demigod-like dragon people. Or dragon-like demigod people, depending on your perspective. Hiccup is smart and all, and he and Toothless's bond is commendable, but even should Toothless do something like control Claude's wyvern with his dragon alpha authority thing, Claude's a big enough threat on his own that it wouldn't really amount to much. Plus, Claude has an advantage against flying things, so sucks for these two. Wish I had a better matchup, but I really did what I could. Yuri Leclerc versus Yuri Lowell from Tales of Vesperia. Oh, come on! I keep saying, oh, I don't want to reuse franchises too much, but here I am, the 5th Tales character and the 3rd from the same game. Just no more, I swear. Can you believe how close I was to pitting Raven against Claude? There'd be no living that one down. Also, yes, Yuri technically is the Lord of Cindered Shadows, so he counts, shut up. Young, long-haired men named Yuri, who were born and raised in the slums, looked down on by people around them despite having natural talents. Using said talents, they try to make the world a better place for their people, the outcasts and the forgotten. Forming a group of outsiders around them to become a sort of found family, they aren't really the main characters of their respective stories, but they have a consistent impact on the world around them. Having either previously or are currently working with a knightly organization, they have found that their dirtier tactics have more immediate impact than the above-board work of certain individuals in their lives that serve as both mirrors and possible equals to them, that being Byleth and Flynn. Yuri Lowell, former Imperial Knight and current Vigilante, specializes in combos, chaining together various attacks in a single stream of damage for as long as possible. However, unlike Judith, he does have some utility beyond that. He has several ranged options, various elemental attacks of different types, and even ways to heal himself. All these abilities are channeled through a Blastia, as I mentioned a couple of times before when covering Vesperia. And should something happen to that Blastia, then Yuri would be unable to use his arts. His skills include the likes of Assassin, which increases damage dealt to and decreases damage he takes from human foes. Reflect, which enables a chance for damage to be reflected, a big shocker. And Immunity, which decreases the likelihood of Yuri being inflicted by a status effect. Naturally, he has the Resurrect skill too, which can let him immediately get back up should he fall. Yuri, alongside his party, defeated ancient monsters, warriors capable of superhuman feats, and was able to undo a planet-destroying cataclysm, albeit with several outside factors helping out. Compare that to Yuri Leclerc, and you'd be surprised to see that they have several similarities. First and foremost, a combination of agile sword skills and magic that can both deal damage and heal himself in the form of Nosferatu, or just a basic heal spell if he wants to not do damage, I guess. He can also learn Silence to stall his enemy's magic, and various powerful attack spells of both the Faith and Reason varieties. His list of swords is the same as Byleth's, which is mostly true for his skills too, like Healing Focus, though he also learns skills such as Miracle or Poison Strike. He can further learn weapon skills such as Astra, Wind Sweep, Haze Slice, and more. And through 3 hopes, he gains the ability to Seat, to create a whirlwind of air that draws in enemies and then explodes. To top it all off, he has the Crest of Oban and the Fetters of Dromai. The Crest of Oban can occasionally prevent an enemy counterattack, and when combined with the Fetters, grants him both Pavis and Aegis, which, when combined, has a chance to reduce damage from bows, magic, swords, lances, axes, and hand-to-hand. In other words, basically every way to hurt him. In this Battle of the Wolves, no, I'm not calling it the Battle of the Yuris, these two are truly evenly matched, not only in fighting styles and skills, but in the versatility of their abilities, magic, and even some of their limitations. Fire Emblem Yuri has more impressive magic, but it has limited uses compared to Tails Yuri's rechargeable TP. Tails Yuri can revive himself from being defeated, meanwhile Fire Emblem Yuri can use the fetters to have almost any type of damage. Force me to take a stance and I would have to say Tails Yuri would win, simply for having a more impressive list of confirmed victories against the likes of Alexei, Duke, and more. Fire Emblem Yuri can stand amongst titans like Dimitri and Byleth, but he has less direct examples to draw from to confirm his strength. Either way, if it does get made, I'm sure the Yuri jokes will rain down upon the death battle community in waves. What? Don't consider Rhea a lord? Too bad, I do, and this is my video. I love democracy. Archbishop Rhea versus Praetor Amalthus from Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That's right, I'm using Xenoblade again! And you're not going to turn off the video because the sunk cost fallacy states that you'll still want to see what I did for Alir, so ha! Anyway, religious leaders with painful pasts which involve the death of their mothers and the loss of their homes, who grow into power over several centuries and ultimately rewrite history to suit their needs. One does it out of a desire to protect what family she has left and to safeguard her homeland as best she knows how, while the other does it to enact a slow but certain vengeance upon the world in what he sees as an act of divine judgment. Their actions and the organizations they lead directly cause the events of both their games by galvanizing the beliefs and actions of the primary antagonists, while also causing the journey of the main characters. In Rhea's case, it's because of her transplanting Sothis' crest stone in Byleth, and for Amalthus, it's because he brought the Aegises down from Elysium in the first place. To get the simpler one out of the way, we don't get too much out of Amalthus in terms of combat capabilities since he only ever enters into combat himself once. Sure, we witness some of his abilities, like dampening blade powers and commanding the Titans, but that first one won't work on Rhea, and the second one is hard to determine as to whether that counts as outside help. So to be straightforward, we'll consider Amalthus himself and the singular battle he participated in. In it, he is able to repeatedly take attacks from close to a dozen of the strongest drivers and blades in Xenoblade 2's world. He does eventually go down, but the fact he held up for so long is notable enough. Granted, he was transformed when he did this in a warped state created from absorbing countless core crystals and funneling the data and energy he collected over centuries into himself, but still him. He can easily set up combos to knock his opponents off their feet, erect a powerful shield around himself akin to that of a blade, or fire a beam of energy called God Rage that makes him invincible as he fires it and then makes him go into the enraged state, which increases his damage output and boosts his stats as you'd expect. An interesting thing to note is that Amalthus has been shown utilizing blades as his agents, but they never properly show up to fight for him in the modern day, only in the prequel DLC. That aside, again, I have to admit that Amalthus is somewhat barren beyond the really good themes he shares with Rhea. I mean, I guess I could have said Getsis, but I don't really think those connections are very good, nor do I know how that fight would even work mechanically as a death battle. Regardless, on to Rhea. With well over 1,000 years of combat experience, the Archbishop is one of the most dangerous foes you can fight, and serves as a boss in many different routes across both Fodlan games. She is able to call on the mightiest of both reason and faith magics with Nosferatu, Recover, Bolganun, and Agnea's Arrow. She also has skills like Vantage, which allows her to attack first whenever her HP is at a certain percentage, and Counterattack, which lets her react to an opponent from almost any distance. Combined, good luck getting the jump on her. Her primary instruments of battle are the Sword and Shield of Seros. The sword restores half damage dealt back to the user when in combat and restores a certain percentage of health at the start of her turn as well. In a similar vein, the Seros shield halves all incoming damage from monster-type enemies, increases the user's defense stat, and restores health at the start of their turn as well. But of course, that isn't her only state, as she can transform into her more draconic and powerful Immaculate One form, with Flight, Draconic Breath, and new skills that can weaken incoming damage of her opponent, bind magic, or generally boost attack power. She actually appears to have two versions of this, with her Hoarfrost version being the result of intense pain and trauma manifesting as a more powerful, more unhinged form, which grants her the Miracle skill, Defiant Strength, which raises her strength when her health is below 25%, and the Vantage skill, which she previously lost in her other dragon form. She can take multiple Spears of Light and survive, even if she's not in the best shape afterwards, and has survived multiple attacks from Byleth at her strongest. Throughout it all, she keeps the Crest of Seros that occasionally increases her attack might when using combat arts, an ability which is quite useless if we're just talking houses, since she only ever has the Grounder art in that game. Luckily, thanks to Three Hopes, we can see Rhea using other combat arts like Astra and Finesse Blade. She also gains access to the Warrior's Awakening state, but compared to everything else, that's kind of minor. Now, taking into the scaling of both worlds, you can probably say that for all Rhea's abilities and examples of strength, the mere fact that Amalthus is a Xenoblade character and the crap that happens in that world is so much bigger than Fire Emblem, Amalthus should get the win easily. But that's boring, so let's think differently. Ignoring Amalthus summoning Titans, which again, I'm not sure how to categorize, many of Rhea's abilities are great for survivability, especially her weapon's healing property. That said, many of her best spells are on the same level as a basic blade attack, which Amalthus was shrugging off in his fight with Rex and the others. On a similar note, Rhea is dodging light while Amalthus is here taking pot shots at Mr. Faster-than-Light Rex. And Rex can predict the future with foresight, So even at her best, Rey is going to have a hard time putting Amalthus down. I'm sure there's more mathematical ways to figure out the winner, but as we see so little of Amalthus himself in combat, this is the best I can surmise. However, that'll be it for Fodlan, and we can at last move on to Fire Emblem Engage. We at last approach the most recent Fire Emblem game at the recording of this video, and the one I've made jokes and references to a number of times. So I know the question on all your minds. Who did I match up Veil with? That's right, I got you again! Ha ha! Veil versus Kurome from Akame ga Kill. Young women who are the younger sisters to the main characters that experience a nightmarish childhood where they're pitted against their fellow kids with only their older siblings for comfort. They would be groomed to be killing machines, but for one reason or another, they would survive their brutal childhood and begin searching for their siblings alongside a taller, armored man who is dedicated to helping her. Both possess the macabre power to raise the dead to such a convincing degree that they can even make use of the same abilities that the dead had in life. Due to being on opposite sides from their sibling, as well as some less than healthy family dynamics enforced by their side, and maybe a sprinkling of mental torment, they are forced to fight their long-lost siblings. Granted, for Veil it was due to mind control, but either way. Eventually, both are able to overcome or at least push past whatever trauma kept them fighting their only family, and were able to be somewhat at peace. Is Veil a lord or lord adjacent? Debatable. Did this video need even more time added to it? Probably not. Is this just an excuse to keep dragging out the reveal of who I paired Alear with? Shut up. First, let's compare armies. Veil's ability to create corrupted and Kurome's puppets are not 100% comparable, as Veil regularly makes dozens of generic zombies and throws them at people. Meanwhile, Kurome has up to 8 puppets that were highly skilled fighters in life, maintaining said skills in death. That said, Veil has also been shown to be able to resurrect people to such a degree that they maintain aspects of their personality, such as with King Hyacinth. It was so precise that Hyacinth could even use an Emblem Ring's power. In that regard, Veil has the superior necromancy ability, but that's not all we're looking at. Kurome received training as an assassin and partook in dozens of successful operations in service to the Empire, being rewarded with the Yatsufusa, which enables her power to raise the dead. He was directly stated to be the strongest member of the Jaegers behind Esdeath from everyone's favorite death battle episode. She could fight and kill monsters several times her size, dodge bullet/laser things from near point blank, and suffer crippling nerve damage and still be able to fight. However, much of this is not due to just training, but rather her taking extreme bodily enhancing drugs that slowly but surely kill her with every dose. While these drugs, and by extension her abilities, would become better over the course of the story, the intervals between necessary doses also decreased and the drawbacks grew harsher. Finally, she received a single-dose drug that would boost her abilities far beyond anything she'd ever used before, with the higher drawback being that once it began to wear off, she'd become weaker than ever before. However, even before receiving this final drug, she was able to keep up with her sister Akame, take on entire armies with just herself and her puppets, and even land a blow on Esdeath. So, with this final drug, you can imagine that she would become even more powerful, although said strength would be a ticking clock as she'd need to defeat Veil quickly after taking it, or else she'd be a sitting duck. And can she do it? Could she beat Veil in time? Veil doesn't seem like much at first, but beyond her necromancy, she's a skilled combatant with both knives and magic, generally using her signature Miséricorde and Obscurité in combat. Both are locked to Veil, and Miséricorde inflicts magical damage and poison to whoever it hits, which, funnily enough, Kurome would have experience with since her sister's sword is a much deadlier version of the same idea. Veil's skill with tomes means that she can use every sort of spell and engage, which includes Meteor, Thoron, and Nova, the latter of which acts like a brave weapon. And she theoretically has access to a number of skills through the Emblem Rings, which we'll get to later, which further connects to her skill Fell Spirit, which quickens the time it takes for an Emblem Ring in her possession to be ready to be activated. Speaking of emblems, which ones would we give Veil? Possessed Veil appears to have a preference for Marth, although she isn't shown to be directly connected to any others beyond that, so it's a bit difficult to figure that part out without just saying she gets all of them. Which, I mean, I guess she could get all of them, but unlike Alear, she isn't exactly equipped to make use of them all. That said, she can raise the dead and equip them with Emblem Rings, as she was shown to do in Chapter 11, which would easily overpower even the best that Kurome can summon. Should Kurome get in close before the drugs wear off, she could finish off Veil pretty easily. But if Veil is able to keep her and her puppets at a distance with her own corrupted, then it's only a matter of time before Veil secures a victory through overwhelming numbers and force. Kurome's childish but cold tendencies when compared to the genuinely kind Veil would be an interesting dynamic, especially when contrasted between how they both treat their powers. Kurome seeing it as a way to keep those she cares about, and Veil hating the fact that she even has it, leading to a possibly somber ending as Veil puts both Kurome and her victims to rest. Alright, with that said and done, let's get to the final act. The matchup I've been wanting to talk about since all this began. We're here! Close to 40 matchups, 5 videos, and near 200 minutes of content all leads up to this matchup, to this idea that no one else has considered, to these combatants. Heroes that are blessed with incredible power, both innately and through metal objects that channel spirits with world-shaking potential, gathering as many of these together as they can to empower themselves and those around them. Possessing the energy and power of both the good and evil forces of their world, they seek to unite and lead their worlds to prosperity. Despite their status as world leaders that are revered and nigh worshipped by a heavy chunk of the people, they're rather laid-back individuals that can turn deadly serious when the need arises. While both started as idealists that believed in the people around them and wanted the best for them, one of them strayed down the path of arrogance and manipulation, slowly becoming the very thing he once despised. Ultimately, both become more than mere mortals and take leadership roles over the entire planet. One continues to prefer to be seen as equal among the people, while the other seeks to determine the world's fate on his own. This is Alear from Fire Emblem Engage versus Sinbad from Magi. I have been cooking this one for a long time. Spoilers for both Magi and Engage, by the way. Besides the natural clash of ideals that is ever present between an idealist like Alear and someone like Sinbad, I find this to be a far better matchup for Sinbad as compared to Gilgamesh, who he gets paired against so frequently. But let's see if you agree with me while I break down what they can do. To start with the non-Fire Emblem character, naturally, Sinbad is by far one of the most powerful people in his world, holding the highest number of Jin in his control with 7, which is supplemented by his skill with swordplay, middling martial arts skills, and minor ability to be able to read and manipulate the Rook, the home of souls and origin point of Magoi, which can be used to empower his own abilities or even take control of a person through one of his Jin's powers. He is also able to manipulate his own Magoi, the magical energy of the world, though only to a certain extent. He uses this technique to counteract an opponent's Magoi and therefore negate it. However, he can't use this for very long, as it deals a heavy toll on his body in the process. But to the more important parts, there's his Jin metal vessels and the Jin housed within. Through Baal, he can channel lightning strong enough to destroy several mountains at once. Through Zapar, he can use sound to command and control people with the Rook, as I mentioned before, or slow down a person's perception and even thoughts to the point that Sinbad looks like he's moving at super speed with Valifor. As time went on, he grew more and more powerful, eventually taking his position as a nigh godlike being through the Sacred Palace, although he would still eventually lose that power and die in a heroic fashion. In the state he was for most of the series, and the one that Death Battle would likely use if they do use him, he was a force of nature that shook the story every time he showed up, without ever drifting into being a Mary Sue. Alear was far closer to becoming a Mary Sue, but I feel they slipped out of it just barely. Alear was the most successful and powerful child of the fell dragon Sombron, outperforming every one of their siblings and even being able to summon emblems. However, upon meeting their eventual adoptive mother, Lumera, Alear began the road to their own redemption and free will. Fast forward 1,000 years, due to being comatose from a laser through the chest that their dear old dad gave him as a parting gift, we find Alear in the state that they are for Fire Emblem Engaged. Possessing the power of Lumera, which she imparted onto them over that 1,000-year period, as well as their innate fell dragon power, they can still summon emblems, but now can raise them at full power in such a way that no fell dragon can. Through the awakening of every emblem from both their own world and the world of the fell Xenologue, they defeat not one but 2 world-ending dragons who have absorbed, quote, infinite power. Vague wording aside, it was evidently pretty impressive, seeing as with said infinite powers, Sombron could lift the entire continent of Gradlon out of the ocean and tear a hole into interdimensional space. Naturally, since this is a Fire Emblem protagonist, Alear went on to defeat Sombron and Rafal, who both had similar superpowered juice-ups. This can be attributed to many people working together, but Alear was definitely pulling a metric ton of that weight. With access to weapons like Liberation, that's how I'm choosing to pronounce it because it's probably French, which fills the engage meter by 1 when Alear attacks and defeats an opponent in 1 turn. Villeglance, again, which I'm choosing to pronounce that way because it's probably French, is a similarly powerful ranged weapon that only Alear can use, and pretty much every kind of sword we've talked about over the course of this entire series. Levin, Killer, Silver, Brave, and on and on and on. Aleer can also use martial arts, which are their own weapons, albeit not especially powerful. But we all know the real centerpiece of Aleer's arsenal: the emblems. Strap in, this'll take a while. Able to call on 19 emblems with relative speed, as every attack against an enemy or the user helps refill the emblem's power. Each emblem imparts its own skills onto Aleer that they can permanently acquire over time, including but not limited to Byleth's Divine Pulse, which can turn a missed attack into a hit through either time rewinding or what can only be described as causality alteration, Orin's Draconic Hex that lowers the enemy's stats, or Roy's Holdout, which, when at maximum, ensures that so long as Aleer has 2 HP at the start of combat, i.e. when a unit initiates an attack, then Aleer will survive said combat with 1 HP no matter how powerful the attack. Then there's even more, like Vantage from Leaf, Momentum from Sigurd, which boosts attack power based on how far Aleer moves before an attack, and Marth's Unyielding, which, when at max, heals Aleer for 40% of their HP if they start their turn with less than 40%. Combine this last one with Holdout and Aleer becomes nigh unkillable by normal means, even without considering the various Marth skills that make just hitting Aleer a huge hassle, like Perceptive and Avoid Plus. Each emblem further empowers their user by granting new skills, weapons, and powers whenever they engage with them. Marth's Divine Speed lets Aleer attack in extra time, Sigurd's Gallop increases Aleer's movement speed dramatically, and Roy's Rise Above ability pushes their user's level higher than normal, though when used by Aleer it pushes them 6 levels specifically. Lyn can summon doubles that can deal damage even if they only have 1 HP each, Camilla's Soar lets Aleer straight up fly, and Corrin and Camilla's Dragon Vein, it's back, lets Aleer choose any out of 10 different areas of effect that can do anything from slow or quicken movement, create a fog to hinder opponents, generate tiles of healing, and many more. And perhaps most importantly of all, Micaiah's Cleric skill allows Aleer to access the ever world-shattering, terrifying staves up to level A, which includes our old friends Silence, Rewarp, and the new one, Obstruct, which creates pillars of ice to block an opponent's path. And beyond even that, there are the emblem's Engage attacks, which use up all their remaining power to perform their most powerful moves. For example, Veronica's Summon Heroes can conjure allies for Aleer, meaning any teamwork-based skills actually work for once, and can even conjure other emblems to fight alongside Aleer, meaning theoretically, Sinbad could be dealing with Aleer and any of the other emblems at the same time. Besides that, you have Byleth's Goddess Dance that enables allies to move again, Hector's Storm Eye that puts Aleer into a highly defensive stance, Tiki's Divine Blessing that imbues an ally with a life gem, which basically gives them a second health bar, Celica's Warp Ragnarok, which teleports Aleer anywhere they want to go in order to unload an explosive attack, and so many more. And remember, all these characters have the chance to be summoned by Veronica as allies with their previously mentioned skills, even if they lack their engage attacks. Naturally, there is one thing about Aleer that I haven't mentioned, and that's due to the unfortunate irrelevance it has in this death battle. That is the fact that Aleer is also an emblem who can engage with regular allies, but not the summons that Veronica can create, and therefore it leaves this part of their power utterly useless. A shame, but it had to be addressed. Even without it, I feel I have made my case as to why Aleer is more than a match for Sinbad. Some might decry that I gave Aleer clear favoritism, and that's because of 2 reasons. Many of Sinbad's powers are somewhat vague or not fully explained, and as a video game character, Aleer has far more that are explicitly shown to us and therefore could be talked about. Either way, the dynamic of this fight would be great. Sinbad would seek the power of the emblems as a way to achieve his goals, but Aleer would be there defending them, calling on their power to halt him. Sinbad would see his younger, more idealistic self in Aleer, which would lead to interesting character moments for both, as both their powers escalate further and further. Now the big question, do I think Sinbad would lose? Yes. From all I can tell, his time as the ruler of the Sacred Palace was short and ultimately subverted by another, and Death Battle would probably use pre-Palace Sinbad anyway, so I will too. With that in mind, Aleer's abilities are far more varied, and while several can be directly negated or even outright ignored by Sinbad's own abilities, Aleer simply has more than Sinbad could possibly account for. In fact, to border on scaling, I know, horrible, Sinbad is regularly popping several mountains off the map while Aleer defeated the continent-razing, hole-in-reality-tearing Sombron, as well as defeating Rafal after his own superpowered level up, meaning this wasn't just a one-time occurrence of beating world-ending dragons. When all is said and done, the King of the Seven Seas would be forced to bow his head to the Divine Dragon Monarch in what would be my personal favorite matchup, and the one I will die defending. And here we are. 5 videos and several months of work all done and settled. These videos have proven to be consistently successful, and I've had some good fun making them. So thank you, my viewers, for enjoying them and encouraging me to make more. It means a lot. I have plans to continue making matchup videos after finishing a couple of other videos I'm working on, but fear not, I will return to this format. With all that said and done though, I am the Hearth Guy. This is the Hearth, and I am so glad you enjoyed yourself enough to stick around. See you all next time.